All right. Well, Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Welcome to the first week of Leviticus.
Yay!
I am excited. Though I've been feeling differently about it this year. Still excited, but the Lord, and I'll talk about this, like I said, I'm giving the Drosh later as well. But the Lord has started talking to me about Leviticus this year several weeks ago. So it's been a little bit intense for me. But I've been reading, which I started reading this commentary on Leviticus last year, but I got distracted by other things for school, so I didn't get to read as much of it as I wanted, but I've been reading it this year, and it's just making me even more excited. So
I do count on your passion. I do enjoy it.
Well, good. I'm glad. So we're going to kind of jump in and see, because I think part of what helps us understand Leviticus is understanding how it fits into the rest of Torah, to the rest of Scripture, and what its purpose really is. Because I think to us, especially being really far removed from sacrificial systems and the type of society that they lived in, I think it's just like, it's all the sacrifices, all the blood, all the rules, all the do this, don't do that. If you do this, you're unclean for this many days, and you have to go do this mikvah, and you have to do that. We get caught up in all these details, and it's so far removed from anything that we know that it doesn't engage us, and it doesn't. It's not as meaningful to us as it's not as easy as the narrative portions of kind of the rest of Torah, but I think that it is significant. So, to start off with, before I jump into all of my notes, what is Leviticus about? Laura mentioned already that she remembers me talking about last year that it's about holiness. So other than holiness, what is Leviticus about? Or what are things that stick out to you about it? Or that you remember from previous years or something?
Besides the setup of it is ways that we can remain holy before the Lord, mannerisms to approach Him, and His desires, even when we see through the sacrificial system, His way to give His people the ability to remain holy and in relationship with Him, so that He can dwell in the midst, because He's holy. He can't dwell in the midst of unholiness.
Right.
Or He won't dwell. Doesn't want to.
Right. Well, He can't, because it's
Yeah.
the whole. I think, and we'll explore this a little bit more as we go. But I don't think it's that He doesn't want to. It's just that the holy can't be amidst the unholy. So I think that catches what part of Leviticus is about. Any other thoughts?
How prevalent and critical the sprinkling of blood is.
Yeah. Very true. Yeah, there's a lot of, especially in the first half of Leviticus, there's a lot of blood, and what you do with it is very important.
You can see Yeshua in the sacrificial system in more than one of the offerings. You know? And so you can see that, like, His fulfillment in each one of those, because it wasn't just like, He wasn't just the Passover lamb, or He wasn't just.
Right.
And so the more I read those and the reasons for, or the different types of sacrificial systems, the different types of offering, that you still see a shadow of Him and how He fulfilled every single one of those.
Right, exactly. Because really, most of the sacrifices, really only like one type of sacrifice is about sin. The other sacrifices aren't about sin. I think that's another struggle that we have, because I think we think to Leviticus, we think sacrificial system, we think sacrifices for sin. And then we know that with Yeshua, He is atoned for our sin, And so we're like, well, why do we need this? But there's just all these other sacrifices, and that's what this portion opens with. So a lot of stuff. I mean, it does get into some sacrifices about sin and restitution, but the opening passages of Leviticus are not about sacrifices that are not about sin.
It's voluntary.
Yeah, it's voluntary. They call it, like the commentaries reading calls them the ascension sacrifices. Like, as you come up, this is your kind of gift to the Lord as you enter into his presence. It's kind of a celebration. It's not doesn't carry the same feeling as atonement. Okay, so I think that's good. So we've touched on it, we touched on these themes, that the primary theme, this commentator, Michael Morales, says that the primary theme and theology of Leviticus is Adonai's opening a way for humanity to dwell in the divine presence. So in other words, we talked about, like, a lot of times we talk about Leviticus, the main theme of Leviticus being holiness, but it's holiness unto what? It's not holiness, because I think if we look at holiness just for holiness' sake, it becomes self-righteousness, and it can become legalism. It can become, right, I'm better than you, or I'm doing things that you're not, or
whatever. I'm not, or you're not doing things that you should.
What do you mean?
By if I were going to speak in self-righteousness, I'm instructing you on what you're not doing.
Yes.
So.
Yeah, and so I think looking at holiness unto being in the presence of God, because like Lori was already mentioning, we have this problem where there's separation between humanity and God, and because God is holy and we are not, and the earth is full of sin and brokenness, and we'll talk some more about that in a minute, but so there has to be a way of reconnecting that presence, and so holiness, and a lot of what Leviticus is about is that path back to the presence of God. Okay, so thinking about the presence of God and this desire, and maybe the Lord's, from the perspective of the Lord's desire to dwell with his people, let's think back through Genesis and Exodus for a minute and think about times or stories or moments when people or a person have been in the presence of God even momentarily, and these would include like angel of the Lord encounters, things like that. So what are some examples of times that someone was in the presence of God or the angel of the Lord in Genesis and Exodus?
Adam in the garden.
In the garden. That's like the ultimate example, right? Because that's God and man dwelling together. That's when everything is still perfect. Okay. Abraham. Isaac. Noah. Yeah. He received direct instruction from God, at least. Yeah.
When Jacob wrestles with him.
Yes, exactly. Yes, Jacob wrestles with him. That's quite an experience in the presence of the Lord.
Of course, the biggest pictures is Moses.
Yeah, and Moses has a lot of these, right?
Yeah. From
the burning bush, so on and so forth, all the way through to Sinai. Yeah. Okay. So we have examples of people in the presence of God already, but God's presence isn't staying with them. They're not dwelling in God's presence. God is not dwelling on the earth, right? So it's kind of like, other than Adam, of course. In the beginning, when everything's perfect before sin enters the world, God and man are dwelling together, and everything is just fantastic. But that's kind of where we start, right? And so tell me, so thinking about that Adam, the creation narrative, I guess, and Adam, so what is the climax of the creation story? What's the high point of the creation narratives?
Him creating man.
Okay.
The high point?
It's the pinnacle of creation. I think the most common answer is the creation of man. But is the creation of man, what is the creation of man without the seventh day? Without the Sabbath? I like worship leader Jonathan Helser. He likes to talk about that. He goes, he'll kind of say, God creates man on the sixth day, and then the seventh day is the Sabbath. And he likes to say, hey, I create, that's Adam's first day, so to speak, whether you think they're literal days or not, doesn't really matter in this context. But is his first day is a Sabbath rest with the Father, with the Lord in the garden. And so he'll say, can you imagine Adam waking up on that Sabbath day and the Lord goes, hey, I took the whole day off to hang out with you. I took the day off work to be with you. I mean, that's like a really casual way to say that, but it gives you this happy thought, right? It's like you just kind of can picture Adam and the Lord just kind of enjoying each other's presence in the garden. And that's Adam's kind of first experience. He lives the rest of his time from that rest. I don't know, I kind of like that picture. I like that picture of Sabbath and the presence of the Lord. So I would say that the climax of the creation story is really the Sabbath rest, because it's God, or it's man in the presence of God. And we know that Adam, of course, is created in the image of God. That is one of the unique things about humanity, is that no other creature is created in the image of God. Sorry, only humanity are the image bearers. And so, let's think about image bearers for a minute. So, what does it mean to be an image bearer? What responsibility? What blessing? What does it mean to be an image bearer of God?
To represent him.
Okay.
When they were called, for the Jews, but even if you go back to the very garden, they were to cultivate. It was like God's representation here on earth.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you're an image bearer, it's to represent him and what he stands for, to be created in his image.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So being a representative, and you kind of touched on the commandment to rule,
Mm-hmm.
to rule over other creatures, and to cultivate, and then we can extend that to cultivating the land.
Mm-hmm.
So there is responsibility in it. And also I think with the image we have part of representing God is having relationship with him, right? To represent someone, you kind of need to know them. You need to know them and have a relationship with them. And so in the garden we have this beautiful picture that God and man dwell together. They can be fully in the presence of each other. There's no sin. Everything's great. And there's just perfect full relationship there. There's fellowship with the Creator. And humanity kind of enjoys this fellowship that no other creature can. So I like this quote from this commentator. He says that humanity is not the culmination of creation, but rather humanity in Sabbath day communion with God. This engagement with the divine is what alone can fulfill the purpose and potential for the image of God. Not merely as keeper of the lower creation, but as lover of the fathomless uncreated. In this way and for this purpose, the image of God itself becomes the wonder of creation. In short, humanity was created for the heavenward gaze and the human soul for a life of prayer. And so I think this makes me think of other verses like that. We're created with eternity in our hearts, and we're created, there's something in us. I think we even see it in the secular world, even if people aren't acknowledging God. There's this desire for something more. There's this kind of innate feeling that there's something beyond what we can see. There's something beyond the physical world. So we're created to desire this relationship with God, with this uncreated one.
Would you read the last sentence of that again?
Yeah, so that says, like, in short, humanity. Yeah, in short, humanity was created for the heavenward gaze and the human soul for a life of prayer. Yeah. So with this idea in mind, that kind of this culmination of creation, this responsibility, or this life and role as image bearers is to be in fellowship with God, we have quite a problem with the fall, because we have this separation. There's this, you think, and, Adam and Eve are cast out of the garden. There's cherubim guarding the gate into the garden, where God can still dwell, but they're now outside of it. So you can almost think of the garden as a sort of, well, we can think about it both ways. So let's start this way, since I'm already saying this. So the garden is kind of a tabernacle of sorts. And you can also say the tabernacle maybe is a new garden. In the sense that presence of God and fellowship with God exist in both places. And so what we have between, Genesis 3, it doesn't take long. We don't have a whole lot of information about dwelling in the garden. Because Genesis 3, they're already cast out. And then we have all of the rest of Genesis and all of Exodus, where there's this wrestle, and we have these moments. There's these moments when there's encounter with the angel of the Lord, who we would understand to be Yeshua, and hearing the voice of God, or some encounter with God, but he doesn't dwell in their midst. He's not present with them consistently. But I think that through the covenants, like especially even like with Abraham, I think of, I will be your God and you will be my people. I think of, I will give you this promised land. I just see so much of, like, I want you to be my people because I want to be with you. And so kind of this, from the being cast out of the garden, we're kind of put on this journey toward, what do? We don't have the presence of God. He's setting apart, he's calling, there's always this thread that he's calling it someone, a family, someone, throughout the story, to be set apart, but they don't enjoy his continued presence. And it is also interesting to even look at kind of the arc of Genesis, and we're going to move on to Exodus here in a minute, but that we start with creation, and we've been talking about this, presence of God, all that. The end of Genesis is the death of Joseph. So it kind of, you go from where basically the garden we understand is kind of heaven touching earth, where heaven and earth are connected together, to they're now separate, and we're seeing the death of Joseph. So it's almost like this descent from kind of this heavenly place down to the depths of death and Sheol. And so we're seeing this, at that point, kind of the greatness of the distance between heaven and earth at that point.
They're even at that point in time, not even in the land anymore.
Right.
It's almost like they keep moving further and further and further away from where he wants or longs for them to be.
Yeah, exactly. And you think of like, physically distant, and also they're in slavery.
Mm-hmm.
So they're like, they're not even able to worship God to the extent that they at that point would know how. And that's, of course, what we've talked about. That's what kind of the Exodus is all about, is that they're trying to worship God. Okay. So then we move into Exodus. And what's the climax of the Exodus story? Sinai. Uh-huh. Anybody else have any other initial thoughts? I would agree. But many would say the deliverance, the Passover, the deliverance. And I think there's an argument for both. I think they can both be the climax of the story in some sense. But I would say Sinai is because of this theme that we're talking about, being the presence of God. And notice, we've talked about before, and we've just read Exodus, and so some of that's probably a little bit more fresh in our minds, but from the time they come out of Egypt, they have the cloud by day, fire by night, right? So they have a sense that they have a form of presence with them. But Sinai aside for the moment, while they're traveling, can they really, are they interacting with, are they enjoying relationship with the cloud? And there's understanding that there's the man in the cloud that Yeshua is embodied in some way, some mysterious way within the cloud. But are they really enjoying, they have the presence, but are they enjoying that fellowship with him?
Moses,
No.
yes, the people know.
Yeah, so Moses has some moments. But again, it's a little bit of in and out, right?
Yeah.
It's a little bit of like, he has moments when he goes into the presence, he inquires of the Lord, and the Lord meets him and speaks with him. But by and large, it's not, but the rest of the people don't enjoy that fellowship. And then, of course, we come to Sinai, we come to this literal mountaintop moment of Moses going up, and it says that he meets with God in the cloud. Of course, he goes up a couple times. We have the whole golden calf issue. We have a lot of things going on there. But then, kind of the second, or the last large portion, I don't know exactly how it would break down, but he comes down from Sinai, and we have like the rest of Exodus is all this instruction about building the tabernacle, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Rich talked about last week, kind of led us through this idea that the tabernacle is this kind of image of Sinai, is patterned with those three portions and all of that, like Sinai. And so it's kind of this traveling Sinai experience with them, which I think is very true, and I think that's why it's so significant. And it's and kind of like we were mentioning before with Genesis, it's, even though it doesn't look like a garden as we would understand, but it's kind of this new garden reality, because it's this place where God's presence can dwell among the people. It's a dwelling place for the Lord. But we also commented, if anybody remembers from last week, this very interesting detail at the end of the Exodus. We're in Exodus now. At the end of this Exodus account. So we know that when Moses went up on Sinai, he was in the presence of the Lord. He was in the cloud, encountered God, spoke with God face to face, all of that. So at the very end of Exodus 40, I'm going to read 34 through 38. And it says, "Then the cloud covered the tent of meeting, and the glory of Adonai filled the tabernacle. And Moses was unable to enter into the tent of meeting because the cloud resided there, and the glory of Adonai filled the tabernacle. Now when the cloud was taken up from over the tabernacle, Bnei Israel went onward throughout all their journeys, but if the cloud was not taken up, then they did not move until the day that it was. For the cloud of Adonai was on the tabernacle by day, and the fire was there by night, in the sight of all the house of Israel throughout all their journeys." So, is Moses able to be in the presence of the Lord? He's not.
No.
This is a bit confusing. And a bit frustrating, isn't it? He's just given all this instruction about the tabernacle. They've built it, and it says, they did just as Adonai said. All these people are involved, all this gold and silver and bronze, and these inspired artisans are making all these tapestries, and they're just making all of these beautiful things. God's presence comes, like he says it would, and Moses can't go in. Why can't Moses go in?
Too much?
It's too much, okay.
I don't understand that. Too much what?
Glory.
Too much glory.
Too much glory.
Yeah. Like it's not, I guess
So
it's not even saying like it's just the train of his robe, which filled the temple, but it's
Yeah.
like, it's, his glory filled the temple.
mhm. So just
I
the
mean,
glory is too overwhelming for a human to be in the presence of it.
Yeah, instead of shining, he would have exploded maybe. I don't know.
Okay.
Maybe not, but.
Well, no one can see him and live, right? And so maybe it wasn't him sending Yeshua this time, it was him coming to dwell himself, and
Yeah.
so it was too much. Too
Mhm.
much, they
Okay.
couldn't
Sure.
witness it and live.
Is it because he wasn't one of the chosen priests?
Some say that, but I think we have later records that he does enter.
Okay.
So Aaron does become the high priest,
Yeah.
but Moses, because Moses is a Levite still.
Okay.
So Moses is special.
Yeah.
Moses is kind of the special, the one exception.
Okay.
Him and Joshua.
Yeah. Well, but Joshua doesn't usually go in.
Right.
Joshua is usually at the entrance while Moses goes in.
Okay.
Which I know sounds like splitting hairs, but for the purposes of this, it is somewhat significant.
Point is that even if he could have gone in, neither one of them could have in that moment because
Yeah.
of the glory.
So these are common understandings of this passage, is that the glory is too much. It was a kind of a temporary, the glory is so overwhelming in this moment that he can't go in. But then later, as we kind of start to unfold the story, they can start to go in. But at this point, especially the last couple verses of Exodus are saying, is that the clouds, it sounds like to me that the cloud and the fire are staying there, that the Lord's presence is not leaving. And we have actually a similar, I didn't write down the verse, but Solomon's temple, when Solomon's temple is dedicated, we have a similar situation where the presence of God comes down and they're not able to enter.
They'll hit their face.
Yes. And so, which is another reason why many people think that it's just too overwhelming. And I think that's very possible. But I think there's also a piece to it that they have been given pieces of instruction up to this point, but they haven't been given the full instruction of how to live this holy life to be able to stay in his presence. So I think they're still kind of in this, season or period of time where being able to enter the presence of God is kind of a special moment that is usually about God bringing a message. But I think that God, with the tabernacle, he's created a dwelling place. And so, because we know that how relational God is, would he really want a dwelling place where no one could come to him?
No.
Yeah. He doesn't want to just be there and let everybody kind of exist around him. He wants people to be able to come in. And I think that issue and that question is what Leviticus is answering.
Mm-hmm.
So because it brings it makes possible kind of this secondary function of the tabernacle, which is fellowship. And we see this through the rest of, when the whole time the tabernacle is standing, and then ultimately even with the temples. This is why the Temple Mount itself is much larger than the temple. It's this place of fellowship. It's this place of teaching. It's this place of worship. It's this place of fellowship with other people, as well as fellowship with the Lord. And so I think that at this point, the tabernacle is built. God has his dwelling place, but there's still this issue that the people don't know how to live in such a way that allows them to be in the presence of God. So that's why when we turn the page, we have the first of many occasions in the book of Leviticus when the Lord says, and Adonai called to Moses and spoke to him out of the tent of meeting and says, so on and so forth. Instruction, sacrificial system, do this, don't do that. This is how you make it right if you screw up. This is how all these things, all this order. I really like order. Maybe that's part of why I like Leviticus too, is because I just really enjoy order. But I think that it's, so Moses, so I think even just looking at this tension of the Exodus 40 is ending with Moses is unable to go in, to Leviticus 1:1 saying, and Adonai calls to Moses. So Adonai is still present, he's still speaking, and he's like, all right, I'm going to teach you how you're going to be able to come in. And like Lori was saying, she said that for a second, but like Lori was saying, is like we can see, I think if you think of this as like trying to bring the presence, trying to allow God and man to have fellowship with one another, you start to see all of these hints toward Yeshua. You see it throughout the sacrificial system. You see it in the way that he tells them to interact with each other, about making restitution, or about all these different things, about the feasts, about everything. And because I think that, I think other than saying Leviticus is about holiness unto the presence of God, I think you can also sum up Leviticus as saying, this is how you love God and love neighbor. Which we know that's what Yeshua says. They ask him, what are the greatest commandments? And he says, love the Lord your God with all your, he says, Shema Israel, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. And then he says, and the second one's like it, you love your neighbor as yourself. So it's this love God, love neighbor. And I think that's all over the book of Leviticus. Because it's all about, you need to be clean so you can come into the presence of the Lord. You need to be, you need to conduct business in this way. You need to conduct yourself in interpersonal interactions in this way so that you can come into my presence, and so that your neighbor, your family, your friends, your whoever are able to do the same.
I think it's at least important for me to remember that this message is being told to people who are still coming out of a mindset of bondage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And because of that, they need to know how to make themselves clean from sin. Mm-hmm. They need to know how to do that so they can enter into the presence of a holy God.
Yeah.
That's why all these regulations about the matzah flour offerings, the shalom offerings, the sacrifices for unintentional sin, all of that is important for them to understand. It's not just about cleaning the body, it's about changing the mind, changing the heart.
Right. Yeah, I think that that's really important because again, this is remembering that in this society, every nation, every culture, every religion around them has a sacrificial system. So Israel's sacrificial system is not this new revolutionary idea in and of itself, but it is in the sense that they are offering sacrifices not to appease the gods, not to negotiate with them, not to get the gods to do what they want them to do, but so that they can have a relationship with God. Which then when we, looking at the, thinking about the sacrificial system, it's all about, yes, there are sacrifices for atonement. There are sacrifices that's saying, I am unclean, which is why, what are some of the instructions about the animal that a person would bring to sacrifice? What are some of the requirements about those animals? Unblemished, which means?
No markings or sores or perfect.
Yeah.
I also wonder too if in giving these instructions that God isn't trying to teach his people that sin is bondage in some way, and that to be obedient to these is to walk into a relationship with God that gives freedom.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a part of it. I think the sacrificial system, there is the element that it is about sin. It is about recognizing that sin is what is separating, and in some sense is bondage. But I think it's even interesting that even the other sacrifices, these shalom offerings and things like that, it's still an unblemished, perfect animal. And one thing that I was reading is that, and I don't remember the word now, but the word that's used for unblemished can also be translated blameless, which usually the Torah or the Bible is using blameless in reference to humans, right? But it's actually the same word that's used for these unblemished animals that are being brought as the sacrifice. And so it's almost this like representational act of being blameless before the Lord and this purity of the shed blood covering sin. Do you see that? Does that make sense, sort of? Because it's this, obviously one of the main instructions to Israel is that they don't sacrifice humans, which is actually unique. There's a lot of really disgusting sacrificial practices, child sacrifice, all of that in other ancient societies. And Israel has specifically said, no, you can't shed, this is, we talk about, there's this idea of these cardinal sins that are kind of, some people say there's no weight to different sins. I disagree. I think that we see the consequence for different sins are different. So the shedding of innocent blood is a big deal. That costs a lot more. That the restitution for that is much higher than I lied to you about having, something that you wanted. Very different. Still an issue. Still things that need to be made right, but they're very different. So anyway, just looking at this coming into the presence of the Lord, you bring your unblemished, your blameless, your perfect animal, kind of as this representation coming into the presence.
I also noticed it also says from the flock, which means you just can't go out and find some random wild animal.
Right.
It needs to be something that's been nurtured and cared for.
Exactly.
That
Yeah.
belong to you.
Right, which also emphasizes the cost, right? The cost of sin. Because
and the cost of sacrifice.
Yeah, because you could probably, especially in ancient society, you could sell this perfect animal and make some good money that would be really beneficial to your family.
Yep.
Okay, is this then what caused Yeshua to become so outraged in the temple, when the custom of selling pigeons that didn't belong to you, but you could buy one and sacrifice that?
So yes and no. So you're talking about when Yeshua is angry and turns over the tables in the temple? Okay, so that's actually a slightly different issue. So by the time of the temple, there's the common practice shifts a little bit because you have people living at far distances. It's very expensive and dangerous to travel in the ancient world. And so there was this practice that there would be animals that you could come and you could purchase your sacrifice, purchase your Passover lamb. They would, raise lambs near Jerusalem so that if you're coming from Rome, you don't have to bring your lamb the whole way, because also there's a good chance it's going to get stolen, there's a good chance it's going to get killed, there's a good chance it's going to get sick, there's a good chance that by the time your unblemished animal leaves from your home, it's not going to be unblemished anymore by the time it gets to Jerusalem. So there were markets outside of the temple where you could buy your sacrifice. I think that there is a part that kind of extortion for that is a problem, and I think Yeshua was upset about that. The specific story about Yeshua turning over the tables in the temple is that there was commerce, there was selling and trading happening on the Temple Mount itself. So the markets that were happening, they were not on the Temple Mount proper. They were in the area around it, where there's a lot of mikveh, immersion baths, and there's a lot of other things going on. There's a market because everybody's coming there. So it's a good business move to set up your market where everybody's coming, right? But they started setting up these booths to sell on the top of the Temple Mount, which was not supposed to happen. And that's what Yeshua is upset about. And where those were set up were actually out in the outer court, where the court of the Gentiles, which is where everyone was able to come. And so in some sense, he's upset that they're doing business where everyone is able to come into the presence of the Lord. All the women, all the Gentiles, everyone's allowed to come into that area, and they're taking up space and doing business
So
where
who
people are trying to
decided
be
that
as
was
close as they can.
acceptable?
Huh?
Who decided? The priests said this was okay. Why?
Because at that time the priesthood was not the line of Aaron. It's mostly understood to not be the right priesthood.
But
This
did
was
they
part of
get
the
something out
issue
of it?
with
Was
the
there a kickback?
Probably.
yes, yeah,
Okay.
because there was also partnership with the Romans at the time, because there's a lot of negotiation happening with the Romans so that the Jewish people could still practice, but kind of appease the Romans at the same time. So it's not the temple temple service. It's not the priesthood. It's not quite the system that was the ideal, which is a lot of what we've talked about before. The Torah is laying out. This is an ideal, right?
Mm-hmm.
We know that it doesn't really work out that way because humans are human, unfortunately, and are pulled to evil things. But because that whole situation with the temple, that's why we started to have groups like the Essenes, like the Qumran communities, who were out away. They were saying, this is not the right priesthood. Things are not happening. This is corrupt. This is not honoring the Lord. We're not going to be any part of it. So we're going to kind of separate off and go out into the wilderness and do our own thing. And then you think that John the Baptist was one of those people, that he's going out and he's like, this is not right, which is interesting because his father is a priest. But he's like, this is not right. What's happening here and how it's happening is not right. So I'm going to go out and do kind of my own thing. And he became an Essene. And some people think maybe I don't know. I don't think that we can connect him directly to the Qumran community, but it's possible. But there were other Essene groups at the time as well. So that may have been a different answer than you wanted. But, okay. But is that somewhat helpful?
Yes.
That was probably more information than you wanted, but.
Lay it on.
Okay. So, what were we talking about? Animals. Perfect sacrifices. So anyway, so basically we have this system set up so that people can come in the presence of the Lord and have fellowship with the Lord. And of course, we do come to the understanding and to the reality that only the priest can enter certain areas, but everyone is welcome to come. And I think that even just bringing your sacrifice, even though you're not entering all the way into the Holy of Holies, still carries this aspect of the presence of the Lord and this relationship with the Lord. Because it affects your life, right? When you're thinking about, oh, I need to save this animal, I'm gonna, raise this animal to be my sacrifice, it's keeping you thinking about these instructions and about being in the presence of the Lord. So, let's see. Well, I guess I have a couple more points I can make, but I guess I'll pause there for a second. So, any other comments or thoughts about this idea, or is it helpful to think about sacrifice as this way of entering in the presence of the Lord, of fulfilling this purpose of fellowship with God, in addition to having the presence of God?
I think it can really fit into a present day understanding that God really does want personal relationship with every single one of us. We're not limited by anything other than our sin from entering into the presence of God. God wants to make it easy for us if we will deal with our sin.
Yeah.
And that is a huge encouragement to me, because I know God wants to help me deal with my sin.
Mm-hmm.
So that means a lot.
Yeah.
And the regulations, such as they are, the Lord can help me understand how to deal with that
Mm-hmm.
practically now.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I think that's good, and I think looking at this is like the tabernacle and this system are pointing to something, right? We talked about this at the very beginning.
Mhm.
It's all pointing to Yeshua, because what happens when Yeshua is on the cross, all three of the synoptic gospels record this, that when he's on the cross, then they word it slightly differently. He gives up his spirit, or says, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit, and that kind of thing, and he breathes his last. What happens in the temple?
The veil rips.
Veil torn.
The veil is torn. That's a big deal,
Yeah.
because even within this Levitical context, there's still this separation. There's still this, and many, we don't have to go all the way into this, but we talked about earlier about Adam and Eve being cast out of the garden, and the cherubim being kind of guarding the way into the garden. What's on the curtain that goes into the Holy of Holies? Cherubim. So it's guarding this holy place where God dwells. So Yeshua dies and this curtain is torn, because and that's where they sprinkle the blood. When they bring the sin offerings, they sprinkle the blood on that curtain. Or, and then of course, on the Day of Atonement, on Yom Kippur every year, the high priest takes the blood into the Holy of Holies. But it's all about getting as close to the presence of God as you can. And so the veil is torn, and now the presence of, and Yeshua has died, the Messiah has come, the presence of God is available. And then what do other scriptures say in the New Testament about the temple, and who becomes the temple? We do. So all of this is pointing to, again, we have twofold purpose of the tabernacle: dwelling place of the Lord and place for fellowship with the Lord. So if we become that, we become the place where God dwells, and we become those who fellowship with the Lord. I still think it's pretty important that we know how to live in a way that he can be present within us. There's
Amen.
Still a requirement for holiness.
Amen.
I've been reading this week Hebrews 10, and I love how he talks about, because it talks about this reality that, after Yeshua comes, we're able to enter the Holy of Holies, so to speak. So Hebrews 10, I'm just going to read a little bit of this, because it's just so good. So I'm going to start in verse 19. It says, "Therefore, brothers and sisters," because it's been talking about Torah, and it's been talking about sacrifice before this. And right before this, it talks about that he's going to put the Torah on our hearts. And so verse 19 says, "Therefore, brothers and sisters, we have boldness to enter into the holies by the blood of Yeshua. He inaugurated a new and living way for us through the curtain, that is, his flesh. We also have a Kohen Gadol over God's household. So let us draw near with a true heart in full assurance of faith, with hearts sprinkled clean from an evil conscience and body washed with pure water. Let us hold fast the unwavering confession of hope, for he who promised is faithful. And let us consider how to stir up one another to love and good deeds, and do not neglect our own meetings, as in the habit of some, but encourage one another, and all the more so as you see the day approaching. For if we keep on sinning willfully after we have received the knowledge of the truth, there no longer remains a sacrifice for sins, but only a terrifying expectation of judgment and the fury of fire about to devour the enemies of God. Anyone who rejected the Torah of Moses dies without compassion on the word of two or three witnesses. How much more severe do you think the punishment will be for the one who has trampled Ben Elohim underfoot and has regarded as unholy the blood of the covenant by which he was made holy and has insulted the Spirit of grace? For we know the one who said, 'Vengeance is mine, I will repay,' and again Adonai will judge his people. It is a terrifying thing to fall into the hands of the living God." So I read this and I see, okay, there's no longer a sacrifice for sin, but there's judgment. So it's like, I don't know. I don't hear this around here, but there's a lot of teaching out there in the world about if you are saved, if you love Yeshua, you're covered by grace and nothing matters. I don't think that that's true.
It isn't.
I don't think that's how it works.
Nope.
And so yes, we have access. We don't have to bring a sacrifice. But we have to repent. We still need to make it right. We still need to pursue holiness and righteousness. And I think that even though maybe some of the specific instructions are hard for us to understand and hard to apply because we don't have a sacrificial system, I still think that we learn about what holiness is through reading Leviticus. We learn about being in the presence of God through reading Leviticus. And so I think that it is a hard book. It is difficult at points. But I think that without, this even goes back to the whole Torah. This is why we read Torah, is because it teaches us what sin is. It teaches us what righteousness is. And that's all that's talked about in the New Covenant is holiness and righteousness and being in the presence of God through Yeshua. So if we don't know what that is, it's really hard to I think live in the fullness of that. So I think Leviticus is actually really helpful in understanding those concepts, but maybe that's just me. And even because I think then about even some of these Psalms that we love to read. So Psalm 15 and Psalm 24 are both have these lines that I think kind of sum it up really well. And it says, Adonai, Psalm 15 says, Adonai, who may dwell in your tent, who may live on your holy mountain? And the answer is the one who walks with integrity and who does what is right and speaks truth in his heart, who does not slander with his tongue and does not wrong his neighbor and does not disgrace his friend, who despises a vile person in his eyes but honors those who fear Adonai, and who keeps his oath even when it hurts and who does not change, who lends money without usury and who takes no bribe against the innocent. One who does these things will never be shaken. That sounds like a lot of things we talk about in Leviticus. And then Psalm 24, we all love Psalm 24, this King of Glory. But it also has this, who may go up to the mountain of God, to the mountain of Adonai, who may stand in his holy place, one with clean hands and a pure heart, who has not lifted his soul in vain and sworn deceitfully. He will receive blessing from Adonai and righteousness from God his salvation. So it's being in the presence of God. I don't know. I feel like I'm just repeating myself, but I get so excited about it because it's like I feel like God is not tricky. He's not like, I want you to be holy and righteous. Okay, what does that mean? Now I have to wrestle through this and figure it out. He tells us.
Yep.
He's very kind. He gives us the instructions and then he defines it. It's very kind of him, actually. Are you thinking something, Stan?
No, but yeah.
I couldn't decide if that was I have a comment or I'm just thinking.
No, I got nothing to say about it.
Okay.
In what you read in Hebrews, it does state, therefore, brothers and sisters, we have boldness to enter the holies, but it's by the blood of Yeshua.
Right.
And it's let us draw near with true heart in full assurance of faith, with hearts sprinkled clean, and bodies washed. So again, this isn't like, okay, so Yeshua took care of it.
Right.
We don't have to worry about whatever, because we're told we can boldly enter, but we have to have received, applied in that sacrifice. That's where that grace, the wrong grace message out there, well, if you've received them, you're clean and you can just, there's still a protocol here to approaching the Lord.
There's still a means to having the blood applied.
Yes, right. It's like
he's
still holy.
Right.
And we're not unless we have the blood. Yeah,
and so this is like we talked about at the beginning, this is one of the things that we struggle with Leviticus is all this blood. And it is, to me, it is still, I struggle with the sprinkling the blood on the people. I'm like, that's disgusting. But it's still here. But I think that we have kind of, maybe spiritualized the blood of Yeshua. It's like, we are atoned for through blood. Like, blood is still relevant to us.
Yeah.
Even if we're not, most of us haven't had the experience of having blood sprinkled on us, and that's probably a good thing. But it's still blood. Like, there's still blood that is what allows us into the presence of the Lord. And I also like that you brought out the cleansing, because it's like, because even think back to the right before Sinai, they're told to bathe and wash their clothes. So there's this cleansing reality, and they're told, and then we have, as we go on many, many, many times, there's blood sprinkled all over the place. There's blood on the horns of the altar. There's blood on the altar of incense. There's blood on the veil between separating the Holy of Holies. There's blood sprinkled on the people. There's blood on Aaron's ear and his toe, and like there's blood everywhere.
And ultimately on Yom Kippur, there's blood sprinkled on the ark.
On the
as
ark,
well.
yes, exactly. And so there's all this blood, and there's all this water. There's, they come into, there's the bronze laver, there's the washing of the hands and the feet, there's this mikveh, there's this immersion before you go up.
Mm-hmm.
They've uncovered tons of mikvehs, of immersion baths in Jerusalem, because you had to fully immerse before you could go up and be on the Temple Mount in the presence of God. So I think even in this context, even when when Hebrews is being written, and I don't know, Hebrews is mysterious. There's a lot we don't know about the writing of Hebrews. I wonder what this is. So this author does think that whoever wrote the introduction for it in the TLB does think that it was written before 70 CE. I'm sure there's argument for after. It's a mystery. It doesn't really matter. But the point is, they understand temple context. So all this is very familiar to them, still.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that even, as we kind of wind backward, I think, again, back to Leviticus, I think the giving of some of this instruction is reminding them of what they've just experienced at Sinai. And Leviticus is also a mysterious book that it doesn't have a timestamp on it. It does seem that it all happened while they were at Mount Sinai. That whole thing was given while they're still at Mount Sinai before they continue on in the wilderness. But it doesn't have a timestamp, and so it's a little bit mysterious. But I still think that there's a lot of things in there that are reminding them, oh yeah, that's what God said to do right before, as we were leaving Egypt, as we were crossing the Red Sea, as we were in the wilderness, as we were at Mount Sinai before he comes down. So it's all like, okay, we have seen God show up for us. This is how, now he's telling us what's important to keep that interaction going, to keep that presence going, to keep that relationship going. And so I think, for me, it's really helpful to remember that, because it's like, oh, this had actually a lot of meaning to these people. Again, it's really hard for us thousands of years later, in a very different culture and very different context, but it had a lot of meaning, and it was triggering a lot of memories and experiences. And all the Torah is about remembering anyway. It's all about remembering the stories. It's all about remembering the times when God showed up. It's about remembering the covenants, about remembering the deliverance, about all of these things. And so I think a lot of what's actually being set up is to help them continue to remember through engaging the senses and through, the smell of the incense, the smell of the offerings, the sight of the fire and the cloud, just the physical act of going up to the tabernacle and later the temple and all of that. It's all to help engage them and to keep them centered, that, and God is literally at the center of their life. The tabernacle is at the center of their community. They can always see it. And so it's, I think all of this is unto, this is how you live so that God's presence can dwell among you and you can have fellowship with him. So other thoughts or questions?
I think this is week 2 of the Remember.
Yeah, this is the Shabbat of Remembrance, which is connected with Purim.
I think it's connected with the Passover too, right? Like I just read that
Yeah.
Torah reading thing. And
Right,
it was like-
yeah. There's 4 Shabbats leading up to Passover, which I believe this is, I'm a little bit lost on my calendar right now. The first of the, yeah.
Yeah. Would seem to be the first.
Yeah. So there's the 4 Shabbats leading up to Passover, that have some additional readings and some additional things, and then also connected with Purim, as well, so, which is remembering.
It all connects.
Yeah, it does. It does. It's funny how that works out.
Yeah.
I find it, like, of course, I like to think of these what-if type things. The progression of this, of how the Lord has walked from Genesis till now with his kids, step by step, like, he could have called Abraham, given Abraham the covenant, and then downloaded all of this
Right.
guidelines, rules, protocol for dwelling with him. He could, but he didn't do that. It's like let's establish this guy, now let's establish a nation. So to me, it's kind of like you can see how the Lord is wanting to walk out stages
Mhm.
with his kids,
Mhm.
rather than just picking one person, giving it all to them,
Mhm.
and then, trying to expect these people to walk this out. It just seems to me, I find it fascinating, his timing, his
Mhm.
layout, and how he wasn't in a huge rush for this
Right,
either.
right.
We're talking spans of 100,000,
Probably thousands of years.
Yeah, so
Like
we're
a
not,
thousand years.
and so by the time Yeshua shows up on the scene, of course, we've got a temple that's been rebuilt by Herod. We've got,
Right.
a corrupt priesthood for the most part. And yet we still have a God who really wants his people to get this right and dwell
Right.
with him, and so they've been crying out for how long?
Right.
For a savior, but his timing on things that doesn't make sense to us, like you could sit back and go, well, I would probably lay this out differently, or wouldn't it have been easier if we had done it this way, Lord?
Right.
And so I just kind of look at that progression of who he uses, his timing of how to do it,
Mhm.
and then what we see later, and I just kind of find the way of that meshing, like, he knows his
Mhm.
timing, he knows what he wants to do, we
He
just need
does.
to get on board with it.
And he doesn't seem to be as concerned or worried about time as we are.
Mm-mm. Not at all.
Because like you're saying, like I think all of us would probably be like, they're making a mess. We need to fix this right now.
Mhm.
And he's like, all right, in a few generations I will. It's like, what? Come on!
Yeah.
Like, but it's like, Rich and Sarah will say this sometimes. It's like he moves at the pace of relationship.
Mhm.
It's like, I think
That's good.
I kind of see kind of him building equity and building trust and building relationship with people through the course of time, because it's like, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, through those generations, it's like, okay, so this covenant was made with Abraham and these promises were made. Okay, is he really going to do this? And then, it's repeated to Isaac and to Jacob. And so by the time you're a few generations in and that family is starting to multiply, there's some equity built, and there's some, okay, God has been consistent.
Mhm.
And he's been saying these same things for a long time. And, I think maybe it's partially accentuated too. I think the pace of life was slower then, they didn't have tiny computers in their pocket telling them all kinds of things they never wanted to know at every moment of the day. So it's like, but still, I think it's the building of the relationship. And yeah, God is not, he doesn't have the same concern about time that we do.
There's a good reason for that.
Which is?
We die.
You are correct.
And he exists outside of time.
Yeah.
He does, yes. He's the
So-
creator, and he's the uncreated one, so you're right. Like, yeah, it's this problem, I think it comes down to this problem of an infinite God and finite people.
Yep.
It's the finite trying to understand the infinite, and that is challenging.
Impossible.
But on the other hand, we did have a beginning, but we also have no end. So
This is true.
we will, our perspective is gonna change.
It's true.
Yeah.
It's true. It's true.
I feel
There-
like I gotta try to make an attempt to excuse myself. I would point out that the Bible is, and it's been said before, this is nothing new. History, romance, adventure,
Mm-hmm.
poetry, and all those things require different disciplines to read.
Yeah.
And I fall short at a few of those.
I would argue that's what makes the Bible so much fun.
It makes it intellectually challenging.
Because that's what, yeah, you're right, and I think, but I think your comment is really important actually, because I hear that and I think about that and I'm excited because I'm like, I get to study this forever and I will never be done. I will never run out of things to learn. I will never run out of things to study. I can spend my whole life doing this and still be learning, and I love that because that's the kind of person I am. I understand not everyone's wired that way, but that's why I'm like, this is the best thing ever. I get to study this forever. I'm never going to get bored. I'm never going to run out of something to study and read and learn about, or learn how to engage with a different type of literary format within it, because you're right, there's so many different types. But then there's also, that's not as appealing to some people. And also, I think that we need to remember, like, this is really complicated, and this is an ancient text, and we are not very well versed in reading ancient texts in modern culture, because most of us, this is probably the only one that we read. Some people may have more interest in history and other ancient cultures and things than others, and so maybe you've read a few other things, but a lot of us don't really depart from the Bible in our readings of ancient texts, and so we kind of, I think that lends itself to, how do I want to say this? Maybe reading the Bible through a lens of the modern age. And the Bible is living. I think it's God's word. It's living. It's applicable today, but it does have a context. It does have an original context, and that matters too. And so I think that also means we need to have grace. like, there's so many passages, Psalms especially, and many passages in the New Covenant that you can just pick up and you can read, and just on a surface level, just, a quick reading is really impactful, is really beautiful. It can engage your heart, it can engage your mind, it can engage your senses. But there's other passages that aren't that way, and I think that, I think it's difficult to expect everyone to be able to understand everything perfectly.
And it takes time.
It takes time.
To dig into the depth of those particular passages and see things from God's perspective. I don't know if I've said it before, but I've heard the Lord say to me that seeing things from God's perspective is the only true way to see reality.
Yeah. Yeah. But it takes time to build that lens.
It takes time to
build that
learn what that
relationship with the
means,
Lord,
yes.
to learn his character, to be able to do that. So I think when it comes to the Bible, you have weirdos like me who are like, this is fantastic. I get to read theology and commentaries and all kinds of different things for my whole life, and this is the best ever. And you have other people who are like, I just want to read it and be done. But I think at the heart of it, I think across all the different ways of interacting with it, I think that the commonality is that we recognize that this is God's word, and that means it's important. And also kind of lending to your point too of just like, this is why we don't just read Torah once. This is why we read it every year. I've been at KL, this is my 10th year at Kingdom Living. I can't say that I've read through the Torah every year since I've been here. Probably the first couples I kind of was in and out a little bit, but at least the last, I would say, 7 years I've done it consistently. And now I'm finally like, all right, I think I can, like, I have a pretty good baseline at least. And in some ways it's like, man, it's taken that long to establish that. And in some ways it's like, man, I wonder what I'm gonna learn next. But again, I'm kind of the Bible nerd type. So
if you think of like, one of the things that I was thinking about when I was reading through this also this time was, yes, Yeshua fulfilled it, but Yeshua also engaged
Yeah.
in all of this.
Exactly.
I mean, this is my Lord, my Savior. He engaged in
Mhm.
this. This was important to him. That temple where he overturned him, this was important to him. If it was important to him, it should be important to me.
Right.
And he, his father set it all up. Just to imagine Yeshua doing these
Mhm.
offerings unto his father while
Right.
he was here.
Mm-hmm.
And also, if you sat there and you thought, if we had been placed in a timeline where Yeshua hadn't shown up yet, but we wanted to know the one true God, we'd be engaged
Exactly.
in this.
And most of the people he was interacting with and was close to, I mean, all the disciples
Mhm.
certainly, and then most of the people he was speaking to were Jewish. This was their life. This is what they lived in. This is what they were taught. So this is, and so that's why he's not coming to say, oh, you don't need that anymore. He's coming to say, look, you've been doing all of this. You've been reading all of this. You've been waiting for this, and it's here. And it fits, and it's consistent, and it's fulfillment. It's not replacement. And so I think, even recognizing that is really important. It's like, this was the scriptures that they were reading, that his disciples knew, and the life that they were living. And so everything that Yeshua is saying and doing fits into the context of that. Okay, well, thank you all for discussing and for engaging in my excitement about Leviticus and the Bible and Torah. I will pray, and it's time to go to service. So Lord, I just thank you so much for Shabbat, Lord. I thank you for this Shabbat that is this reminder of this culmination of creation, Lord, of your desire to dwell with us and to be present with us and to have fellowship with us, Lord. I thank you for the way that you have created this story in Torah that we can engage with and that we can learn from, and so that we can know what holiness and righteousness are, and so that we can be in your presence, Lord, that we can ascend the mountain, that we can be in the holy place with you, Lord. Lord, I just ask that your presence would be with us today on this Shabbat in service, and even just through the rest of our week, Lord. I ask that we would learn to carry your presence, be stewards of your presence, Lord, and that we would, as we have been called the temple in this messianic age that we live in, Lord. We thank you for Yeshua. We thank you for his blood and atonement, Lord. We thank you that the veil was torn and that we can interact with you, Lord. So Lord, I do just ask that you would just continue to be present and speaking to each person in this room and in the congregation, and as we continue to worship you today. B'Shem Yeshua.